There are moments in life, fleeting and seemingly insignificant, that hold the power to unravel entire realities. We walk through our days, convinced of the solid ground beneath our feet, unaware that a single, unexpected tremor can shatter everything we thought we knew. Imagine, for a moment, a place dedicated to the very blueprint of life itself, a gleaming, sterile DNA center, where the secrets of ancestry, identity, and even destiny are meticulously categorized, cataloged, and brought to light. It's a place of science, of absolute certainty, built on the unwavering logic of genetics. But what happens when that certainty is not just questioned, but violently ripped apart by an anomaly so profound, so utterly improbable, that it defies every established rule? This isn't a story about a misplaced gene or a forgotten relative. This is a story about a man, a shadow of humanity on the fringes of society, who walked into that sanctuary of scientific precision and unwittingly, perhaps even unwillingly, began to pull at threads that would unravel a truth far more terrifying and heartbreaking than anyone could have ever conceived. Our tale begins not with a bang, but with a barely perceptible whisper, the almost silent creak of the glass door at the forefront of the state-of-the-art Genesis Genomics Center. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind of Tuesday morning where the sun, still low in the sky, cast long, indifferent shadows across the polished concrete of the city. Inside Genesis, the atmosphere was, as always, one of focused efficiency. Dr. Arthur Finch, a man whose passion for genetic sequencing was rivaled only by his meticulous attention to detail, was already at his desk, his fingers dancing across a keyboard, bathed in the cool blue glow of his monitor. Arthur was in his early 40s, a lean figure with an almost perpetually furrowed brow, a testament to the endless puzzles he sought to solve within the double helix. His dark, slightly disheveled hair and the faint circles under his eyes spoke of countless late nights spent poring over data. He was a scientist to his core, a man who found comfort in logic, in the elegant simplicity of biological code. Suddenly, a flicker on the periphery of his vision. He looked up, expecting perhaps a late-arriving intern or a delivery. Instead, his gaze settled on a figure standing hesitantly just inside the entrance, bathed in the harsh, unforgiving fluorescent light. The man was a stark contrast to the pristine environment of Genesis Genomics. His clothes, what remained of them, were tattered remnants of a life lived on the unforgiving streets, layers of faded, stained fabric, ripped at the seams, clinging to a frame that was clearly undernourished. A worn, dirt-encrusted backpack, an extension of his existence, slumped against his leg. His hair, matted and streaked with gray, fell over a face etched with the harsh lines of hardship and exposure. A thick, unkempt beard obscured much of his jaw, but his eyes were what truly held Arthur's attention. They were a startling, almost unsettling shade of piercing blue, unfocused yet strangely intense, like distant stars trying to pierce through a heavy fog. He was unequivocally a homeless man. A hush fell over the usually bustling reception area. The two receptionists, typically calm and composed, exchanged nervous glances. It wasn't uncommon for people from all walks of life to seek out Genesis, often with desperate hopes of finding answers about their health or heritage. But this was different. This man wasn't just unkempt. He carried an aura of profound weariness, an almost palpable sense of having been completely untethered from the world. He shuffled forward a step, his gait a slow, uncertain drag, as if each movement was an immense effort. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through his hands as he raised one, extending a crumpled, yellowed flyer towards the receptionist. The flyer, Arthur could faintly discern even from his office, was for a free DNA testing program, part of a community outreach initiative Genesis had launched months ago, primarily aimed at identifying long-lost relatives for elderly citizens. It was a program that had yielded some heartwarming stories, but nothing remotely like this. The receptionist, a young woman named Sarah with a kind but cautious demeanor, managed a strained smile. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, her voice a little softer than usual. The man's voice, when it came, was a raspy murmur, like dry leaves rustling in a forgotten corner. "DNA test," he managed, the words a struggle, as if unused to forming coherent sentences. Said, "Free." Eris, despite his initial surprise, felt a strange pull of scientific curiosity. He'd seen desperate individuals before, but there was something in this man's eyes, a glint of something beyond mere desperation, that intrigued him. He rose from his desk, the quiet click of his chair echoing slightly in the hushed room, and walked towards the reception area. Sarah looked up, relieved by his presence. "Dr. Thorne?" she murmured, a silent plea in her eyes. Eris nodded, his gaze fixed on the man. "Welcome, sir," he said, his voice calm and even. "Yes, we do have a free testing program. May I ask your name?" The man hesitated, his eyes flickering around the opulent lobby, taking in the gleaming surfaces and the hushed professionalism. A flicker of something that looked like fear, or perhaps shame, crossed his face before he finally spoke. His voice a little stronger this time, though still a guttural rumble. "Arthur. Arthur Finch. Arthur Finch." The name hung in the air, oddly formal, almost out of place for his appearance. Eris felt an inexplicable tremor of anticipation. He knew, instinctively, that this was not going to be a routine sample. There was an unspoken narrative in Arthur's gaunt frame, in his haunted eyes, a story waiting to be told, or perhaps uncovered. "Please, Arthur, have a seat." Eris gestured to a comfortable armchair in the waiting area. "Sarah will get you the necessary forms. It's a simple cheek swab, nothing painful. Just a few minutes of your time." Arthur shuffled over to the chair, settling into it with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years of weariness. His movements were slow, deliberate, as if his body itself was protesting every action. As Sarah handed him the clipboard and pen, his hands, calloused and trembling, struggled to hold the pen steady. Eris watched him, a strange mix of empathy and scientific fascination building within him. What had led this man to his current state? What hidden stories did his DNA hold? The questions gnawed at Eris. He knew the basic protocols for the free testing program. Identity verification, though clearly for Arthur this would be challenging, medical history questions, again likely sparse, and then the simple cheek swab. But something about Arthur felt different, felt a momentous. Eris had a gut feeling, a scientist's intuition, that this man's genetic code would not be as straightforward as a typical participant's. He imagined the statistical noise, the probable markers of disease, of malnutrition, of a difficult life. But what if there was something else? Something profoundly unexpected? As Arthur slowly, painstakingly, filled out what little he could on the forms, Eris returned to his office, his mind already racing. He mentally reviewed the various genetic markers and databases Genesis had access to. Familial links, disease predispositions, ancestral origins, these were their bread and butter. But the nagging feeling persisted. Arthur Finch was not just another lost soul seeking a connection. He was a puzzle, a human enigma wrapped in tattered clothes, walking into a place designed to reveal every last, hidden detail of who he was. And Eris, with a blend of professional curiosity and a growing, unsettling sense of foreboding, knew that the moment Arthur's sample entered their lab, the quiet hum of Genesis Genomics was about to be irrevocably disrupted. The first tremor had begun, and its ripples, though barely felt now, would soon become a tidal wave, revealing secrets that no one, least of all Eris Thorne, was prepared to face. The ordinary Tuesday morning was about to become anything but. The stage was set, the unwitting protagonist had arrived, and the curtain was slowly, inexorably, beginning to rise on a drama that would redefine the very boundaries of genetic discovery and human tragedy. The quiet hum of the Genesis Genomics lab, usually a comforting backdrop to meticulous work, now felt charged with a subtle, almost imperceptible tension. Arthur Finch's sample, labeled simply as Patient A77, had been processed with the same rigorous protocols as any other. Yet, for Dr. Eris Thorne, this particular sample was different. It gnawed at him, a low thrum of anticipation beneath the surface of his usually stoic scientific demeanor. He had personally overseen the initial stages, a decision that his colleagues had found slightly peculiar given his senior role. Just a feeling, He'd mumbled in response to their raised eyebrows, dismissing their unspoken questions with a wave of his hand. But it was more than a feeling. It was an insistent whisper of intuition, a premonition that something profound lay hidden within the strands of Arthur Finch's DNA. The initial results began to trickle in, appearing on Eris's screen in a cascade of complex datasets. He was looking for anomalies, for anything that deviated from the typical patterns he encountered daily. And then he saw it, a marker. Not just any marker, but one that was incredibly rare, almost unheard of in the general population. It was a genetic signature, distinct and unmistakable, typically associated with a specific, extremely uncommon mitochondrial lineage. This lineage was so unique that it had been catalogued in only a handful of cases globally, often linked to families with documented multigenerational histories of specific inherited neurological conditions. Arthur showed no overt signs of such conditions, at least not that Eris could discern from their brief interaction. This was the first thread, thin yet undeniably present, pulling at the fabric of the ordinary. Eris cross-referenced the marker with their global databases. His fingers flew across the keyboard, a flurry of precise movements. The search returned a match, a single solitary entry. It was an entry from a cold case file, a missing persons report from over 3 decades ago, detailing the disappearance of a child named Ethan Hayes. The report stated that Ethan, then just 5 years old, had vanished without a trace from a suburban park in a neighboring state. What was truly astonishing was that Ethan's family, the Hayes family, was known to carry this exact, incredibly rare mitochondrial DNA marker. The chances of 2 unrelated individuals possessing this identical marker were infinitesimally small, bordering on impossible. A jolt ran through Eris. His mind, usually a fortress of logic, began to race, piecing together fragments of an unimaginable puzzle. Could it be? Could Arthur Finch, the gaunt, homeless man who shuffled into their pristine center, actually be the missing Ethan Hayes? It seemed utterly preposterous, a scenario ripped straight from a sensationalist novel. Ethan Hayes would be in his late 30s, early 40s now, roughly Arthur's age. But how could a child, presumed dead for decades, reappear like this? And why was he living on the streets? He called Sarah into his office, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by a look of concern. "Sarah, pull up everything we have on patient A77. And then, I need you to discreetly access our cold case archive. Look for anything related to a missing child named Ethan Hayes, specifically from around 32-33 years ago." Sarah, sensing the gravity in his voice, nodded silently, her brow furrowed. She returned quickly, a thick file in her hands. As Eris read through the faded police reports and missing person flyers, the pieces began to click into place with a horrifying precision. The descriptions, the age, the time frame, it all aligned chillingly. The Hayes family had been prominent, affluent, and their son's disappearance had been a national sensation, a heartbreaking mystery that had captivated the country for months before fading into the archives of unsolved cases. The emotional weight of the discovery began to press down on Eris. He wasn't just dealing with abstract genetic data anymore. He was staring at the potential rebirth of a decades-old tragedy. He ran the mitochondrial DNA sequence again, meticulously, almost desperately, searching for any error, any statistical anomaly that might debunk his theory. But the results were unequivocal. The match was virtually perfect. Arthur Finch was, genetically speaking, Ethan Hayes, but the identification, while a scientific triumph, brought with it a torrent of disturbing questions. Why was Ethan, a child of privilege, now Arthur, a ghost haunting the city streets? What unspeakable events had transpired in the 32 years since his disappearance? The initial relief of a found child quickly gave way to a chilling sense of dread. There was a story here, a dark narrative of trauma and loss, hinted at by Arthur's ravaged appearance and his almost catatonic demeanor. Eris knew he couldn't alert the Hayes family immediately. The shock could be immense, and he needed more. He needed answers about Arthur's current state, a medical assessment, and ideally some form of communication from the man himself. But Arthur had disappeared as quickly as he had arrived after his sample was taken, a transient shadow melting back into the urban landscape. The next few days were a blur of intense research for Eris. He delved into historical news archives, revisiting the tragic story of Ethan Hayes. He read about the parents' desperate pleas, the massive search parties, the eventual, agonizing acceptance that their son was gone. The details were heart-wrenching, painting a vivid picture of a family shattered by an inexplicable loss. The father, a renowned philanthropist, had retreated from public life. The mother, a celebrated artist, had reportedly never recovered, her health deteriorating over the years. Eris found himself becoming increasingly obsessed. The scientific puzzle had morphed into a profoundly human mystery, one steeped in pain and unanswered questions. He began to feel a heavy responsibility, a moral imperative to uncover the truth of Arthur's life, not just for the Hayes family, but for Arthur himself. What had he endured? What had shaped him into the silent, broken man who walked into Genesis Genomics? He contacted a colleague, Dr. Elena Petrova, a brilliant forensic psychologist specializing in trauma and memory. He presented a hypothetical case, careful to avoid revealing Arthur's identity, describing a man with severe amnesia and apparent homelessness who might be linked to a cold missing persons case. Elena listened intently, her sharp mind processing every detail. The psychological impact of such an experience, Elena mused, her voice calm but serious, would be immense. Prolonged trauma, disassociation, identity confusion. It's not uncommon for victims of severe abduction or abuse to suppress memories, or even develop an entirely new persona as a coping mechanism. Their core identity might be so shattered that they construct a new one, a survivor self, to navigate an unbearable reality. Her words resonated with Eris, painting a grim picture of Arthur's potential past. If Ethan Hayes had indeed been abducted, his life on the streets could be the culmination of years of abuse, neglect, and a complete shattering of his former self. The thought sent a chill down Eris's spine. This was no longer just a scientific discovery. It was a deeply personal tragedy unfolding before his eyes. The silence in his office became oppressive. The weight of what he had uncovered felt immense, almost unbearable. He looked at the blurred photo of a smiling 5-year-old Ethan Hayes next to the recent grainy image of Arthur Finch captured by the lobby camera. The resemblance, once pointed out, was undeniable, the same striking blue eyes, the same subtle curve of the jawline, though hidden beneath years of grime and despair. Eris knew he had to find Arthur again, not just for the Hayes family but for the man himself. The DNA had spoken, screaming a truth that had been buried for decades. But the DNA could only tell him who Arthur was, couldn't tell him what had happened, and that, Eris realized with a growing sense of urgency, was the most terrifying, most crucial piece of the puzzle yet to be uncovered. The unraveling had begun, and with each new thread, the story grew darker, more complex, and infinitely more agonizing. The path forward was unclear, fraught with ethical dilemmas and profound emotional challenges. But one thing was certain. Eris Thorne would not, turn back now. The quiet hum of the lab was about to be replaced by the tumultuous roar of a deeply buried secret finally breaking free. The city's concrete labyrinth, once a mere backdrop to Eris Thorne's meticulous scientific existence, now felt like a living, breathing entity, its shadows concealing an untold number of forgotten stories. His discovery about Arthur Finch, the homeless man who was genetically Ethan Hayes, had thrown him into a vortex of moral and scientific quandaries. The initial scientific elation had long since evaporated, replaced by a cold dread. He had the undeniable proof of identity. But what then? How do you return a ghost to a family that has mourned him for over 3 decades? More importantly, how do you help a man so profoundly broken that he seemingly no longer remembers who he is? Eris had spent days trying to locate Arthur, walking the very streets Arthur was known to frequent. He spoke to outreach workers, to other homeless individuals, showing them the grainy photo from Genesis's security camera, trying to piece together a trail. The city, however, swallowed such individuals whole, making them vanish as easily as they appeared. It was a disheartening, almost futile exercise, highlighting the brutal anonymity of urban life. He felt a growing despair, the urgency of his mission intensified by the knowledge of the Hayes family, living their lives, unknowingly on the precipice of a revelation that could either heal or utterly destroy them. And then a break. A call from a local shelter coordinator, a kind-hearted woman named Maria, who Eris had briefed in confidence about his unusual search. "Dr. Thorne." Maria's voice was hushed, urgent. "He's here, Arthur." He collapsed near the library, and someone brought him in. "He's very weak." A surge of both relief and trepidation washed over Eris. This was his chance, but it was also a crisis. He rushed to the shelter, his heart pounding. Arthur lay on a cot in the infirmary, his breathing shallow, his face gaunt and pale. He looked even more fragile than before, a mere whisper of a human being. The years of exposure, malnutrition, and untold suffering had taken a severe toll. Eris felt a profound pang of sorrow, seeing the once vibrant Ethan Hayes reduced to the skeletal figure. He spent hours by Arthur's bedside, speaking softly, recounting snippets of the life of Ethan Hayes, showing him old photographs of the Hayes family. A smiling couple, a joyous 5-year-old boy. Arthur's eyes, those haunting blue eyes, would occasionally flicker, a faint flicker of recognition, or perhaps just a ripple of pain passing through them. But no words came, no memories surfaced. It was as if a crucial part of his consciousness had been deliberately walled off, locked away to protect him from an unbearable truth. As Arthur slowly regained a semblance of strength, Eris brought in Dr. Petrova, the forensic psychologist. Elena, with her gentle yet probing approach, began to work with Arthur. Through weeks of patient, painstaking therapy, fragments of memory began to surface, not as coherent narratives, but as fractured, nightmarish images. Flashing lights, a suffocating darkness, a voice, a harsh, gravelly voice, and a pervasive sense of terror. It was clear that Arthur was a victim of immense trauma, his mind protecting him from the full horror of his past. One afternoon, as Elena was guiding Arthur through a relaxation exercise, a single word, forced from his lips, shattered the fragile peace of the room. "Cellar." Then, another word, barely audible, a guttural whisper, "Cage." Eris and Elena exchanged a horrified glance. These weren't the fragmented memories of a lost child, but the chilling echoes of a nightmare. The images became more vivid, more terrifying. A small, dark space, chains, the stench of damp earth and fear. A man, a shadow always just out of focus, yet menacing. It wasn't an abduction. It was an imprisonment. Eris immediately contacted the authorities, presenting his irrefutable DNA evidence and the psychologist's findings. The police, initially skeptical, were swayed by the scientific certainty and the disturbing nature of Arthur's emerging memories. A specialized cold case unit was assembled, and a full-scale investigation was launched. The renewed media frenzy was immediate and intense. Ethan Hayes was alive. A miracle, they called it, but Eris knew it was a miracle born of unspeakable cruelty. The breakthroughs came rapidly after that. Arthur's fractured memories, combined with advanced forensic techniques and decades of stored evidence, began to paint a horrifying picture. The police, tracing the geographical markers from Arthur's glimpses of memory, narrowed down a search area to an isolated, rural property several hours from where Ethan had originally vanished. It was an abandoned farm, dilapidated and overgrown, its history seemingly unremarkable. What they discovered there was beyond anything Eris could have imagined. Hidden beneath a crumbling barn, a perfectly concealed, soundproofed bunker, and inside, a grim tableau that confirmed their darkest fears. The bunker was small, claustrophobic, and sickeningly primitive. A rusty cot, a bucket, and scrawled drawings on the wall, childlike images, but filled with a profound despair, depicting a recurring figure. A gaunt, terrified boy looking out from behind bars, and a monstrous, shadowy figure standing over him. The police also found old, crudely fashioned shackles, a few forgotten toys, and most disturbingly, a journal. Not a coherent diary, but scraps of paper, notes, and disturbing ramblings, carefully preserved in a waterproof container. The writing was fragmented, erratic, but it was the writing of Dr. Arthur Finch, a disgraced geneticist who had been a fringe figure in the scientific community, obsessed with bizarre theories of human development and isolation. He had vanished around the same time Ethan Hayes disappeared, presumed to have died abroad. The horrifying truth then began to emerge, piece by agonizing piece. Arthur Finch, consumed by his twisted scientific ambitions, had abducted Ethan Hayes. His goal? To conduct a monstrous, isolated experiment on human development, an attempt to prove his warped theories on the absolute malleability of the human mind under extreme deprivation and controlled manipulation. He had kept Ethan imprisoned in that bunker for years, systematically stripping him of his identity, his memories, and his connection to the outside world, molding him into Arthur, his perfect, isolated subject. He had fed him just enough to survive, providing rudimentary education but twisting every concept, every truth, to fit his sick narrative, isolating him from reality. The journal documented the agonizing descent of Ethan into Arthur, the chilling, methodical process of psychological torture designed to break the boy's spirit and reshape his mind. It detailed Alistair's perverse fascination with his subject, his attempts to erase Ethan's past and create a blank slate. He had even, horrifyingly, taken his own DNA, a sample of his own genetic code, and given it to Ethan, claiming it was Ethan's true heritage, further cementing the false identity and severing the last vestiges of the boy's real lineage. This was why Arthur had shared a rare, specific marker with the Hayes family, yet had also seemingly carried the subtle, psychological imprints of a different father. It was a macabre scientific twist, a deliberate act of genetic deceit on Alistair's part. The twist, the utterly chilling revelation, was this: Arthur Finch hadn't died abroad. He had meticulously faked his own death, disappearing from public view, only to resurface years later, living a quiet, unassuming life in a different state, miles away from the bunker. He had simply abandoned Arthur when his experiment reached its conclusion, or perhaps, when he tired of it, leaving the broken man to fend for himself, a final, cruel act of abandonment. He was living under a new identity, a respected member of a small community, believed to be a retired professor. The police, acting on the newly discovered evidence, apprehended him swiftly. The confrontation between Eris Thorne and Arthur Finch, when it finally happened, was chilling. Arthur, a man now in his 70s, thin and outwardly frail, showed no remorse. His eyes, devoid of emotion, simply regarded Eris with a cold, scientific detachment. The subject proved resilient, he stated calmly, as if discussing a laboratory animal, but ultimately predictable. Eris felt a wave of nausea. This was the true monster, hiding behind the guise of intellect, committing unspeakable acts in the name of a depraved curiosity. The revelations were too much, too grotesque. The suffering Arthur had endured, the decades stolen from him, the deliberate erasure of his very essence. It was a crime beyond comprehension. The conflict had reached its horrifying zenith, not in a physical confrontation, but in the brutal, undeniable truth of what had happened. A truth that screamed from every page of Arthur Finch's twisted journal and every fractured memory of the man now known as Arthur. The pieces of the puzzle were assembled, but the picture they formed was a tapestry of pure, unadulterated human horror. The world, and certainly Eris Thorne's understanding of it, would never be the same. The revelations had landed, not as a shockwave, but as a silent, devastating explosion within the very fabric of identity. The storm of revelations had broken, leaving behind a landscape irrevocably altered. Arthur Finch, the twisted architect of Arthur's nightmare, was apprehended and swiftly faced justice. The evidence against him was overwhelming. His meticulous, chilling journals detailing the experiment, the bunker, the forensic evidence, and most powerfully, Arthur's fractured but increasingly coherent memories, painstakingly pieced together by Dr. Petrova. The trial was swift, a media circus fueled by the sheer audacity and cruelty of the crime. Arthur Finch was sentenced to multiple life terms, a small measure of justice for the decades he stole and the identity he shattered. But justice, Eris Thorne knew, was a cold comfort when faced with such profound loss. The immediate aftermath of the revelations was a maelstrom of conflicting emotions for the Hayes family. The initial joy, the ecstatic, almost disbelieving tears at the news that Ethan was alive, quickly mingled with a crushing wave of grief. The child they had lost, the vibrant 5-year-old, was gone. In his place was Arthur, a man scarred by unimaginable trauma, a stranger bearing the eyes of their beloved son. The reunion was fraught with a heartbreaking complexity. Ethan's parents, now elderly and frail, approached Arthur with a mixture of desperate hope and profound trepidation. They saw their son, undeniably, in the deep blue eyes and the curve of his jaw, but the man before them was a ghost, a survivor of a private war. He was learning to speak coherent sentences again, to relearn the simplest social cues, to grapple with a world that had moved on without him. The task of reintegrating him into a semblance of normal life was immense. Eris remained a constant presence in Arthur's life, not just as a scientific witness, but as a silent, empathetic anchor. He visited him at the specialized trauma care facility where Arthur was undergoing intensive therapy. He observed the slow, agonizing process of healing. Arthur gradually began to recall more, not just the terror of the bunker, but fleeting glimpses of his early childhood, the warmth of his mother's hand, the sound of his father's laughter, the taste of his favorite ice cream. These were fragile, precious moments, sparks of his true self rekindling. The Hayes family, despite the pain, embraced Arthur with an unwavering love. They understood that he might never fully recover his past self, but they were determined to provide him with the present and future he deserved. His mother, despite her failing health, found renewed purpose in caring for him, reading him stories, trying to bridge the chasm of lost years with boundless affection. His father, once a distant figure, became a gentle, patient guide, reintroducing Arthur to the world, one small step at a time. It was a long, arduous journey, filled with setbacks and moments of profound despair, but also punctuated by small victories, a coherent conversation, a flicker of genuine joy, a memory finally claimed. Arthur, in his own way, began to find a fragile sense of peace. He would never be Ethan Hayes, the child of privilege who vanished. He was Arthur Finch, the survivor, the testament to human resilience in the face of unimaginable cruelty. He found solace in simple routines, in the quiet presence of his refound family, and surprisingly, in the natural world. He spent hours in the garden, meticulously tending to plants, perhaps finding a reflection of his own fractured self slowly regrowing. The story of Arthur Finch, once a scientific anomaly, had become a profound human testament. It was a stark reminder of the fragile line between identity and experience, the devastating power of trauma, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. For Eris Thorne, the experience had forever changed his perception of his work. Genetics was not just about sequences and markers. It was about the stories etched into those sequences, the lives they represented, and the profound human drama they could uncover. The sterile environment of Genesis Genomics now felt less like a lab and more like a gateway to hidden narratives, each sample a potential key to a world of pain, triumph, or unfathomable mystery. The scars of Arthur's past would always remain, etched deeply into his psyche. He might never fully reclaim all that was stolen from him, but he was no longer a ghost. He was a man, broken but mending, surrounded by love, finally free from the silent prison of his own shattered memories. The questions that lingered were not about who he was, but about the profound implications of his journey. What other secrets lay buried in the forgotten corners of society, waiting for a single, unlikely trigger to bring them to light? What unseen horrors unfolded just beneath the surface of everyday life? The final image for Eris was of Arthur, sitting in the sunlit garden, a faint smile on his face, tracing the delicate veins of a leaf. It was a quiet moment, devoid of grand pronouncements or dramatic resolutions, but filled with a profound sense of fragile hope. A life, once completely lost, was slowly, painfully, being rebuilt. And that, my friends, is the chilling, yet ultimately hopeful, story of a homeless man who walked into a DNA center, And what they discovered shocked not just a single lab, but an entire nation. It's a story that reminds us of the profound power hidden within our own genetic code, and the unimaginable human dramas that sometimes lie just beneath the surface of everyday life. If this tale of mystery, resilience, and the enduring power of family resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel for more untold stories, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into the hidden truths that surround us. Until then, stay curious and remember, sometimes the greatest mysteries are found not in distant galaxies, but in the human heart.